I'm going to move around because you guys have been sitting quietly all day. Once again, this is the triggering event in 2012. If you want, we have both the refinery report and the report in Spanish available on our website. CalARP, in fact, really does not own any of these regs. The CalARP regs are owned by the Governor's Office of Emergency Services, and the PSM regs are owned by the Department of Industrial Relations, CalOSHA. But the Governor said, CalARP, make this happen. I'm the staff person there. The focus of the report and the task force are these topics, which we've gone over ad infinitum. These are the topics. And I am very happy to say that Steve and Jordan did a lot better job of describing these proposed regs than I ever could. That's why you have engineers, because they're into those detail things. So I am not going to go over each and every one of these things in detail, but I might talk on a couple of different points in each of them. Here, on the DMR, this is really the thing that was felt was behind the Chevron event. They knew it was corroding. Chevron wrote the book on sulfidation. They knew that these pipes really should have been replaced, and each turnaround it kind of got pushed back. So we're going, hey, how can we prevent this from happening? So that's why the DMR is there. Hierarchy of hazard control. I think Steve really went into a great job in describing that. And what we want to see coming out of this is the analysis. Just doing a hazard, doing an HCA is one thing, but you got to figure out what it means and what you should do about it. And so that was really what came out of it. Now, I haven't updated this since the September 24th version, but we want people to take the highest order of safety. We want to make sure that the safety issues and say, oh, it's just too expensive. You got to have a damn better reason of not doing something that's identified than, well, it's too expensive. Here again, he talked about this. One of the things that we want to make sure about is we want to avoid those unintended consequences. So where's my Great Plains guy? My Plains All-American guy? So, there he is, right? So one of the issues about like the cutoff valves. One of the things they say, oh, they had a cutoff valve, it would have been as bad. But if the stuff hasn't been maintained and that cutoff valve does one of those hydraulic shocks and it blows it up all over the place, you don't want those unintended consequences. We want to think this stuff through. You don't want to diss you here. And then the management of organizational change. And they went over this, and again, one of the things that is, this is like, to me, this is new stuff, right? Certification by the refinery manager that this change will not increase the likelihood of a major incident. Wow, that's significant, right? That's putting people's butt on the line. Jordan and I, we were down in one of the safety forums we held down in Carson. And we had an operator from one of the refineries who basically got up and said, I've been working in this facility for 20 years, I'm working the boards, and I had like 2 boards I was working. And recently, they changed it, and now I'm looking at 4 boards. I can't do that when everything's running well. So that's an organizational change that clearly would have, impacts on the day-to-day activities, but would clearly be beyond the capability of that operator if something went awry. So these are the things we're trying to avoid. And we recognize that people want to work, organizations want to work more efficiently and more, cost effectively. We recognize that. Don't want that to be at the expense of safety. Human factors, and again, Steve and Jordan went through that very nicely. And it's just things that we've seen. Again, the issue of fatigue. Has anyone in this room not been in a job that they've been dead tired and they've done something stupid? Right. Okay. So we want to reduce the impacts of fatigue and the other aspects that interfere with us doing our job effectively. If in an emergency you got to turn off a valve and there are 2 or 3 valves that look exactly the same and your heartbeat is going at 180 beats per minute, it's really important to know which valve to turn. Okay? And we talked about this, earlier, is really in my mind, the process safety culture comes from the top. People can give you lip service, but you know that they don't really mean it. In other places, you know they really mean it. And we want to make sure that the safety culture is an inherent and intrinsic and a strong part of each of the organizations. And part of it is, again, I was talking, well, Michelle and I were talking earlier, you know, if you're taking a class, if you're doing a process like a Martha Stewart thing and doing trompe l'oeil, right? If you screw up the trompe l'oeil, no one's going to die. This is important stuff. If you don't do this stuff right, there can be significant consequences. And that's why the emphasis on this. And the reason we've got all these requirements that just might seem so arcane and so convoluted and so burdensome is because bad things have happened in the past. Right? And now, in this case, we're really trying to get out in front of it as much as possible. Now, we also hope, and I think that was part of the message that Steve and Jordan were talking about earlier, where most of you are doing this stuff anyhow. And it might need a little tweaking, so this is not like a brand new activity. So, and we also recognize that there are items of scale. Okay? So, you know, Helen and Melinda, you have small refineries. We recognize that, right? So hopefully the work that you're going to have to do here is not going to be in, you know, the same order of magnitude of the refineries in the Bay Area or down in Southern California where you guys are dwarfed, right? So we are mindful of that and, you know, want to be reasonable. I think the people in the UPA here, which sounds like some sort of polka band, right? That they're reasonable here and will work with you on these topics. Okay? And then program management, right? So the program management is one of these things like, okay, we're going to go here, we're going to end up here. No, this has got a lot of steps. And, you know, I think, you know, it's always good to have engineers because they are way beyond what I can do. Right? That you want to make sure that nothing gets lost between the cracks. And employee rights. This is very important. Obviously, it is a significant part of the DIR, the PSM regs, but who knows this stuff better? The people that know this stuff best are the people that are working at the business end of this stuff. And when when we're requiring incident investigations, we don't want to say it was human error and fire the guy who was at the business end. Because generally, they're trying to do their best job for the most part, unless there's malice or forethought. It's the systems that created the circumstances for things to go downhill. And the indicators, again, they went through that. And the difference on a lot of these are refinery managers got to be sign off on it, not in this one, but other things. They got to post this stuff. You know, that's a level of transparency that you've never had before. So that's the stuff that Steve and Jordan went through in much more detail. Now I want to talk about the emergency preparedness and response amendments. This is stuff I've been working on for about a year, and they were just posted literally on Tuesday. So here's the way it worked. In the recommendations, there were certain things in the emergency response section they said we found as being shortfalls during the Chevron Richmond event. One was that the folks who were responding couldn't communicate with the people on site. That's not a good thing. Okay? So we want to make sure that there is interoperability. Okay? We want to make sure that when the outside responders show up, that they are able to seamlessly integrate with the people who are working the response inside the fence. And an incident command that's considered to be a unified command. Now we saw, okay, obviously ExxonMobil has had 3 incidents since February. And one thing though they do really well is they have agreements, they have interoperability, and they have a unified command. They are really good at that. When Torrance Fire shows up, they basically seamlessly integrate into the incident command structure. That's a good thing. But in terms of the February 18th event where the electrostatic precipitator decided to blow up. The focus, and this is just kind of human nature, of the fire folks and the folks on site, they focus in on the point of origin, on the electrostatic precipitator. What they didn't focus in is all the stuff leaving the facility and basically dusting the local community, right? So these are the things that we've learned. We really want to make sure that the people running the show are dealing with both the offsite consequences, especially because with the need of having instant public information to get out, right? Those of you that live close to a facility, if something's coming out of that facility, you want to know what it's all about, okay? Plans and protocols to protect persons outside of a refinery. Boy, that's open-ended. I took advantage of it. And you'll see in a moment. And drills and exercises, and then the issue of airborne releases. So what happened was when we put together a group to work on these standards, basically the recommendations said, change the area plans. The area plans is what the unified program, in this case, Kern County Environmental Health, puts together and say, this is how the county is going to respond to a hazardous materials emergency. And I brought out a draft and I showed it to a bunch of folks, and the folks representing the equivalent of the Kern County Environmental Management folks around the state in the refinery area says, wait a second, this is very uncool. You can't ask us to do stuff when we have to get the information from the refineries themselves. So I went, oh, great. So now I got to write regs to address the refineries under CalARP that the UPA can put into their area plan. And that's the way we approached it. So what we did is say, and this is one of the big things, we figured how can we capture the offsite consequence area? What's the area that we need to plan for? And originally we were going, oh, they have these new toxic endpoints. We'll do twice the toxic endpoints. That sounded like a good start, but there are too many problems with that. We said we'll do a mile. But if you have a release of, let's say, HF out of a facility that we remain unnamed, ExxonMobil, their plume goes several miles. That didn't work either. So we said, because we're regulators, we'll put the onus on the regulated folks. And we said, okay, in consultation with UPA, the polka band from Wisconsin, the air district, the community, and the owner or operator of a petroleum refinery shall designate a geographic zone subject to potential off-site impacts of a release as approved by the UPA. Wow. That means the onus goes on the refinery to figure out what are the off-site consequences. Now, I have an ulterior motive. I know you're shocked. I would love to see HF out of refineries because I think it's a bad actor. And of a facility that might remain unnamed, like ExxonMobil, right? If they said, we maybe, if we got rid of HF, that geographic zone would shrink considerably. That may be one of the motivators. So I do have an ulterior motive, I'll admit it. So what do they need to do in that geographic zone? They need to have outreach. They need to tell the public of the potential hazards. They need to figure out how they're going to be notified, right? You send up smoke signals, okay? What actions they need to take, right? And basically, right, we got two choices they call protective actions, right? Shelter in place or evacuation. Or in other words, hunker down or run like hell. Those are your two choices, right? Okay. How to get additional information. Again, when it started snowing in torrents in February, from the catalyst that had blown up out of the electrostatic precipitator, they would need to figure out how do they get more information. Okay. Then communication with the emergency response agencies and places where you're going to find folks, local medical facilities, right? It's important for the medical facilities to know what is occurring because, one, they should protect the people inside their facilities, often by turning off their HVAC systems. Two, they also need to prepare for an onslaught of people that are coming for care. Not necessarily because they need medical care, but in the mind's eye of the public, a hospital is a place of safety and security. So they think they're all gunked up, scientific term, all gunked up, right? Where are they going to go? Or if they're just scared, they're going to end up going to the hospital. Okay? And then also places where people congregate. The schools, the transit agencies, railroads, utilities, and they say workers in the zone. And let's say you got a mall right downtown, right down here, or a sporting venue. So we want them to take a look at the geographic area and take a reasonable and appropriate look at what may be impacted there. We recognize that we have communities with multiple languages. We also don't want to rely on a single technology. Okay? We also want to be concerned about people with access and functional needs. And that has become a big thing in emergency planning. Recognize that in the World Trade Center, the people who had access and functional needs generally died. Okay? In the recent fires, the Butte Fire and the Valley Fire, I think we had around 5 fatalities. I think 4 of those folks had access and functional needs. Not good. Okay? Then, how are they going to respond to the emergency response organizations? Here's one of the things. In the Exxon facility, a month or 2 ago, they had a very small drip at their HF, in their alkylation unit. Drip, drip, drip. But the AQMD was immediately notified because they had alarms in there, but it took a little while for Torrance Fire to become notified. Of course, I'd rather have Torrance Fire notified first. Okay? Talking about the notification within the community, the institutions, and also things like testing and maintenance, good engineering practices, and coordinating and conducting those protective actions. Okay? And then another issue is really need to know air monitoring and detection. What is happening off-site? Now, I sat down with the refinery managers in Northern California around a year ago. I can tell you that I got a really warm reception, as you can well imagine. Right? And one of the points that I made is, does anyone in this room think that within 5 to 10 years that every one of the refineries in the Bay Area will have off-site monitoring and monitoring in the community, in addition to fence line monitoring? And there was no one said, oh, that'll never happen. My feeling was, and my recommendation was, look, get out and embrace it. Have your folks are all, sitting right next to each other. Why don't you develop a system that is effective, that you can do and monitor? It'll be cheaper and more effective. And then I was talking with one of the big environmental groups who actually was brought in to design one of the monitoring systems. And his comment was, well, we put in this monitoring system, a lot of the off-site emissions weren't actually coming from the refinery. They were coming from other locations. They went, oh, I didn't think that was going to happen. But I want to work on data. It's a science that I want to help to drive us. So these are the things that we're looking at. My regs are around 1/10 the size of the safety and prevention, the stuff that Steve and Jordan were talking about. But I think they're very far-reaching. So some other aspects of this. We will insist that the folks having an emergency response use the same organizational structure to respond to an emergency as the outside folks coming in. Punchline is use the incident command system, use the standardized emergency management system, use the national incident management system. They're all basically variations and offspring of the incident command system. The key here is when you have something go to hell, you don't want to figure, it's not the time to figure out who's who and what's what. You want to be able to address the system. Common organizational structure, common nomenclature, all the rest of that stuff, that's what we want. We want to put your efforts into dealing with what needs to be done. And again, unified command. And for those of you, back in 1970, when they had a series of wildland fires in Southern California, the issue of a unified command came up is because you had these fires that are raging through communities, and one fire chief would go, it's my fire, and the other fire chief would go, it's my fire. And they'd be going toe-to-toe over this. By the time they'd figured out who was in charge, the fire had burned through both their jurisdictions and moved on to another one. Again, we don't want that. When something bad happens, we want everyone to know who can make the decisions. We want them to make the decisions together wherever possible. Okay? Another thing we say here is you got to have sufficient resources for the bad things that will happen. Okay? So again, to the satisfaction of the UPA, we want to make sure that you've got, if you say you got mutual aid actually works. And we're probably going to base this on the OSROs, the Oil Spill Response Organizations, that was designed by the Office of Spill Prevention and Response at the California Department of Fish and Wildlife. So that was primarily for the marine environment, but they've moved inland recently. Okay? And then if you have external response organizations that are going to support you, then it's sufficient for what you can expect to occur. Okay? Material and trained personnel. We had a refinery where you had folks on a dedicated fire department, and the folks in the fire department and the refinery wanted to join the union. They finally said, okay, you can join the union, and they disbanded the fire department. Well, their capabilities went down at that point. So we want to make sure that the material and personnel that you have is sufficient for what might happen. Okay? We want to talk about interoperable communications. Again, you don't want to be able to, you remember the story when we invaded Grenada, and we were on the ground, and like the Air Force couldn't talk to the Army, and there was this, I don't know if it's anecdotal or not, the story of some like Air Force colonel had to go to a payphone in Grenada and call back to the Pentagon and tell these other guys to do something. Right? We don't want that to happen. And then you have sufficient EMS and decon and the ability to demob. Okay? And then we want to say, hey, if you say you're going to do this, you have to be able to demonstrate competency. And those of you familiar with the NFPA standards, National Fire Protection Association standards, the term keeps reoccurring, being able to demonstrate competency. And how do you do that? You have the appropriate training, you have the appropriate equipment, and you practice, practice, practice. And you do that by doing drills and exercises. We didn't want to say you have to do 2 from column A and 3 from column B. You want to work out an exercise schedule with the UPA that actually addresses the issues that are important. And from year to year, it may not be the same. You may want to emphasize one thing one year. You may want to have recurring themes another year. You want to make sure that you're doing it right. I said to model it on HSEEP, the Homeland Security Exercise Evaluation Program, which I really can't stand, but they have the definitive activities on what is a tabletop, what's a functional exercise, what's a full-scale exercise. I said it doesn't have to follow HSEEP, it just needs to be modeled on that. Okay? And again, the input we want, this is the first cut. We're throwing out to you. We think they're reasonable. We think that these are appropriate, but we are soliciting input. We are in the pre-regulatory phase. So it is now, if you got problems with what we're talking about here, now's the time to let us know. Okay? And then the worker and community safety elements, testing the notification systems, because, again, during they just switched over in February in Torrance to a new notification system, and it didn't work right. Or during August 2012, they had problems with the community warning system, probably the most sophisticated community warning system in the country in Contra Costa County, but when they had the event at Chevron Richmond, the community warning system didn't work right. They had some major glitches. Partially is they sent out notices to the entire county. Well, it was a localized event, so there were a number of different issues, and they were working on refining it. And then we said, okay, you have to do at least one full-scale exercise every 3 years. I prefer you do them at least annually, but we said at least, once every 3 years. Coordinate with the CUPA. Point is that we want to make not some knucklehead up in Sacramento, that would be me, to make the final decision. Those folks in the back, the rogues gallery, need to be the final arbiters of good taste because they know the system better. They know the communities better, right? And we said one thing is, and if you've got documents that address this all or some of it somewhere else, it's okay. For example, they've got a very sophisticated communications plan on interoperability between Torrance and ExxonMobil. I don't care. As long as it works, just submit that as, by reference. It's okay with us. So that is the substance. And then we said, okay, now we got to turn the tide on the area plan folks, because they're the ones who made me do this. And said, okay, well, some things were specific in the report. We want to know the emergency management duties and authorities of the local health officer. Okay? So here, environmental management is part of public health. That's not true in all parts of the state. Most people don't understand the amazing amount of police powers inherent in a local health officer. It's not an exercise that most health officers like to employ or activate, but they are really, it is really amazing. Unlike law enforcement says, well, everyone's got to get out of here, they generally don't force you to leave. But the health officer, in their inherent police powers, and say, you got to leave there, and you got to go over there and not leave. And that doesn't exist in just about any other circumstances. It's not something that most health officers are comfortable with. And the issuance of a public health emergency really triggers a lot. Okay? Then also mutual aid resources, unified command, and a joint information center. There is nothing worse than having multiple people getting on TV and saying different things. We want to have one message, many voices, not messages. Okay? We ensure that the air districts and others have an opportunity to comment on the area plans. We want to have an overall picture of what the communications plan looks like in the event something poorly happens at the refineries. And again, the overview of the air monitoring warning systems, what's the evacuation planning, and the training exercise. Basically taking the information that the refineries submit and putting it into one cohesive document. Okay? So, based on what my presentation earlier today and now, I want to say is that effective management of hazardous materials and waste actually does do good stuff. I think we've seen that. We've seen less incidents, less large incidents. So I can, during lunch, say it has been a long time since they've had a major release in this county. And a lot of it is a testament to not the regulators, who will bring the band on behind me, boys, but also the people here in this room who have been implementing the programs within their facilities. And I think, Stephen Jordan in their presentation really hit it on the head, is, these are sensible things, but safety is in the details. And the more you do to develop these programs to reduce the inherent risk means the less time and something bad happens, well, you avoid something bad happening, and you stay up and running, and you'll be profitable. Okay? But I always look at the contradictions in life. One of the contradictions in life is, let's look at an organization that will remain unnamed. The Department of Toxic Substances controls the state. Okay? They base their entire program on fees on hazardous waste generators. But they're set out to have people reduce their generation of hazardous waste. So if they're effective, they work themselves out of existence. Yeah, when does that ever happen? Right? So, it's important on multiple levels, both on the industry level and on the government level, to have effective, sustainable programs, but actually do have a positive input. And that's me. That's my phone and email. I'm easy to find, except when I'm on the road, which is always.